Live. The gentleman cleaning his ears while pretending to adjust the headphone is Scott Parks.
I was doing
I've
both.
talked about Scott occasionally here and there. I've been trying to get him to join me for a live stream for a solid couple of years. He always skillfully evaded it, and I think he just slipped up this time. And now we're gonna talk. So if you are ever on Sniper Sky, the gentleman who kept on answering questions about Vortex fairly politely was usually Scott. But now Scott decided to wrap up his tenure with Vortex. And is it public who you're with now or not?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Scott now works for Geisly, so he left Vortex but didn't exactly go very far away. But how long were you with Vortex?
Just over 15 years.
Just over 15 years. So we were chatting offline, and we thought that we want to have a little bit of a discussion about riflescope durability, how and why they fail or don't, the types of things Scott's been seeing from a QC standpoint, the stuff that's gone back. And I don't know how much of it he could share with us, but probably a fair bit. Again, if you're uncomfortable sharing anything, don't. And beyond that, this is not intended to be a lecture. I've got Riflescope set up in a Columnator. We'll talk a little bit about how to test things and what to look for. But beyond that, today's live stream is really supposed to be a Q&A. This is an opportunity to ask Scott questions because you don't usually get somebody who spent a decade and a half behind the scenes in an optics company that you guys can harass. On the plus side, and I mentioned that in the video description, Scott is a pretty serious long-range shooter. I think you were one of the early PRS guys, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So he knows quite a bit about rifle scopes, both from a manufacturer standpoint and from a very high-end user standpoint. How high did you get in PRS back when you were shooting a lot?
Um, I mean, I've won a couple matches back in the
Okay,
day. I
okay.
certainly couldn't today. I mean, I haven't
Yeah,
I haven't shot seriously for a good 5 or 6 years.
all right. If you're in the running to win a match, you can shoot. I'm gonna shoot the local PRS style match this coming Sunday. And I'm just trying to not have zero stages, right? So it's a very different,
Yeah,
very different priorities.
it can it can happen in some of these matches these days. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anyhow, I see there are a few people here already. I assume you guys can hear us okay. If you can, please put something in the chat box, the usual sound check. And then it's up to you. Tell us what you want us to start with. What did you always want to know or were afraid to know about how rifle scopes fail? Let's see. So we've got the view statistics. Okay. All right. Scott, so the way this thing works after you and I say something is about 20 seconds before
Okay.
people can hear anything. Mr. Northman is here on YouTube. Good evening to you too. So there's a little bit of a delay between when we talk about and we something and when we get a response. Okay.
Copy.
So let's do this. While people are thinking about questions, I've got a rifle scope set up, and I'm gonna go. Oh, never mind. There we go. Brant
Oh
is on
boy.
it. So how do you start that one? Sounds good.
Um,
Oh,
so
oh, we have got
the
some good
most,
questions.
yeah,
All
we've
right,
got
let's
some good
do
ones
this.
coming
Let's
in.
do it. Okay.
All right. Most common failures. So actual failures. Um, Now, since we're on with Ilya here, I presume we are sticking to um, afocal optics rather than like red dots and whatnot, right?
Oh, you
Um,
know what? We can talk about both, but we just have to be clear about
sure.
different ones.
Okay.
The question with red dots is always so interesting. Well, let's do this. Let's talk about rifle scopes. Stuff that looks kind of like this, right?
Yep.
And then when you're done with this question, I do want to mention a little bit about red dots.
Okay. I would say um, probably the most common actual issue that I've seen kind of across the board from most manufacturers, and it mostly pertains to first focal plane scopes, but can also be in second focal plane scopes. And the reason for, and well, I'll just tell you what it is, and it would be reticles canting after manufacturing. So reticles canting at, under recoil. The reason for that it happens is, well, in first focal plane scopes, I know Ilya, you know this, but you have a glass reticle that literally just has to be held in place with lock rings and glue. So there's nothing, there's no screws that go through it. It's literally a round piece of glass, as you can imagine, that sits in a round piece of aluminum that either gets just lock rings on each side or lock rings on each side and glue. We typically, when I was at Vortex, everything got glued. Because if it didn't, it was just a matter of time before a reticle canted. I would say but even that, it's pretty rare. But I would, it's that, and maybe a toss up between like illumination circuit board issues.
Okay. Yeah, see, if you were asked me to make a guess, I would have said illumination, especially on push button illumination, that's routinely less reliable than rotary.
Right. Than a rheostat.
With the rotating reticles, I've seen a few over the years. Seen some on Dupols, seen one on Vortex Diamondback HP.
Yeah.
And I've seen a few. I will say this: I've seen many more illumination failures. Generally speaking, honestly, the most common failure in riflescopes is some idiot doing something bad to it, right?
Right, but that's not exactly an optic
but it's
failure, right?
And that's what I was getting. Failure, it's a user error.
Yeah, to be clear, I was really trying to stick to like an actual, like the scope. The end user did everything correct, and the scope still had a problem.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of something mechanical. I would agree with you. Illumination is more prevalent than canted reticles, but both of those are way more prevalent to not holding zero, turrets not tracking. Some of the common things that I would assume, at least from reading from forums, that I feel like a lot of people would guess would be the most common things.
Yeah, the tracking part is the one that I find most interesting. It is in my practice again. So something to keep in mind, right? So I'm here every week, every couple of weeks, etc. And I've seen more riflescopes go through my hands in a year than almost everyone, probably everyone listening to this podcast, will see in his lifetime. The only person I've ever had on here who has had his hands on more riflescopes than I do, and by a significant margin, is Scott. Right? Like the volume of
just because it was my job.
Exactly, it was his job, right? The sheer volume of different riflescopes he has had a chance to spend time with is significant, to put it mildly. Before we move on to the next question, I do want to address a little bit the business with red dots. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but talking about failure modes on red dots is probably the trickiest of them all for two reasons. One is that they have really come a long way in the last few years. If you look at the durability of red dots from 5, 6, 7 years ago, and what is normal now, and even in expensive ones, we might as well not be in the same world. They've really come a long way, at least in my practice.
Yeah. Now, are you talking? I would say that for like pistol style red dots.
Correct.
Regular full size red dots have been pretty durable for a long time.
Have been robust for much longer. That's right. So the small ones, the pistol size ones.
Yeah.
That's one. And two, because they're on pistols, it's very difficult to deconvolve when there was a normal failure of some sort, or some idiot was ramming it into the wall just to see when it's going to break.
Right.
Like it's a different clientele. right? Different,
Yeah,
often the different
100%.
use. Yeah. So with red dots, it's a very difficult conversation. The only thing I can say with a great deal of certainty with red dot sights is those modern enclosed ones are more shock resistant because it's a cage. It's easier to make it robust.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Uh, but
You
but
have a
I will.
quasi erector tube. Everything's glued together. You've got a
Yeah,
super strong erector spring. You
yeah,
know, they're very
yeah.
simple sights.
But even with open emitter ones, the modern ones like the Vortex Defenders, RMRs have been robust for a while. The shields are pretty
Hmm.
robust. They're quite even the $300 Chinese ones. There's so many now that seem to hold up to normal rigors of recoil and stuff extremely well.
Yeah, 100%. The one thing I would say about the lower end stuff
Hmm.
is, while the durability's there, the the fit and finish as far as the internals go is like, getting it zeroed might be a little
Correct.
difficult because like the
Yeah.
adjustments, the
Yeah,
emitter
they're
kind of bounces around a little
inconsistent.
bit.
Yeah, yeah, they
Exactly.
jump, they settle, but once it's set, they usually stay set in place.
100%. Yeah, if you can get it, once you get it zeroed, you're generally pretty good.
Okay. But anyhow, so most of this conversation is going to be about rifle scopes. I think that's what I do most, but throw anything else at
Yeah.
us
I was going to say, since we're
that
on
you
the
like.
topic of open emitter sites, though, the one thing that's very
Hmm.
difficult for that manufacturers have had to deal with over the years is the inconsistencies in 2032 battery thickness and battery
Yes.
contact. So if just a quick, if you guys are having dots blinking in and out here and there, it could be as simple as a battery swap, with 22 with 2032s, or what's the smaller, the
There's a
1620s.
1630, yeah,
Is it
1620,
1632 or
1632.
1620s? Whichever the smaller battery.
There
I
is a
can't remember
1632 and there is a
what the fast fire
1632.
uses.
Oh, that's a smaller diameter. That's a 16, I think it's 32. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I never realized this thing about batteries, but I have a lot of different red dot sites. A lot of them are from Shield. It's a UK company. They actually, when they send you, when you buy a red dot from them, in the box, there's a bunch of these little stickers that say Shield. I never quite understood what they're for, so I used them as target stickers. But then I realized the battery that Shield puts into their site at the factory has that sticker on it to make it slightly thicker.
yeah,
And when I started putting it on, the blinking things went away. So I
yeah,
figure.
yeah, and it's you can buy a ton of batteries and the same exact brand, and
Mhm.
they can vary in thickness. So it's like, well, do you, as a manufacturer, do you spend your time measuring batteries as you're going through QC, or
Yeah, that's very cool. All right. Next. Oh, this is a good one.
all right.
Are there material differences in durability across scopes from the same OEM? For example, Light Optics works.
I guess, let's see. Are there material differences? I mean, if I answer that question for the way it's worded, I would have to think that is kind of referring to like the aluminum type for the tube,
No, no, no.
maybe.
Material. What the way he means is the like measurable differences. Let's say, and this was just a discussion on the hide, and I posted the link to
Okay.
the live stream. We may be getting that. For example, for the 6 to 36 scopes, right? So there is a
Yep.
Razor Gen 3, Element Theos, Zeiss S3.
Yep.
They are all within $500 of each other, right? They are mostly made in Light Optics work. It's not exactly the same design. There are
Right.
differences. But Theos and S3 are pretty similar. Gen 3, I think, has like different IPs. So I think that was Vortex's own design, or at least modified. But would you expect durability differences between those three?
Um, yes, but not because of the materials. Um, sorry,
Mhm.
not because of the materials, but because of the build specs and the QC process afterwards
Okay,
within the manufacturers, right? Because
correct.
we all have different QC process and what we look for. You know, Yeah.
So when you talk about QC process, are you talking about paying the OEM more for QC, or are you talking about
No,
what
no.
Vortex does in house, which is something I happen to be
Yes,
a little bit familiar with, right? So uh,
exactly.
every razor that comes to Vortex gets tested. Every
Correct.
opened, looked at it, it goes in the collimator. There's some tests here and there, right?
Correct.
So what the manufacturer does after taking delivery is what you're talking about.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then as far as the durability during manufacturing, there are a number of things you can do there, and I would assume which are kind of proprietary. So, I won't get
Yeah,
into
of
those.
course.
Um, but with my experience, I can generally look inside the scope and see a couple of different things of whether or not companies are doing these things that are, that I've learned over the years seem to make scopes more durable. I mean,
So
bedding lenses is one common one that I think I can
mhm.
talk about, right?
The what
And that's
lenses?
a bedding or,
Bedding. Got it. Yeah.
using adhesives.
Yep.
Um, and, it, that dramatically improves things. So, for the life of the scope, anyways, but it's messy and expensive, and so it's not everybody does it,
Yep.
and and
So
it's and, and it does just squeak out the last little bit.
yeah,
It's not.
it's playing the odds really to take
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
I remember when I did a little bit of work with March some years back, and one of the things that surprised me was that they really cement every little piece of glass in. So whenever they had to take anything in for service, they had to pop it in a thermal chamber and warm it up for a couple of days before they could do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's no fun taking them apart after they've been
no, not at all. And another thing is that I heard, and I don't remember who I heard it from, may have been from you, but I don't think so. I think they started using more and more adhesives back in a day when they started working with Night Force. And Night Force was very instrumental in getting Light Optics Works to make robust
one
scopes. The
one
rest
hundred
of
percent.
the industry really benefited from it, right? So,
Yeah, I
and
have no problem admitting it. I
yeah,
think that's 100% true.
yeah. And
You know, and
so,
that kind of stemmed from them working with NSW
mhm.
back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay, for the layman, NSW.
Naval Special Warfare, so Navy SEALs,
Mhm.
um, and above.
Exactly. So to answer your question, it's a question that also somebody on YouTube asked me. They wanted me to review a Maven RS 1.2 scope, which is a Light Optics Works 2.5 to 15 by 44. And it's basically the same exact scope as tracked 2.5 to 15 by 44. I don't know for sure what Maven asks of LOW in terms of quality requirements and stuff, but I know what track does. I suspect it's the same scope with a different reticle and different elevation turn. So I don't have any plans to review the Maven if
Right,
the gentleman is watching. Not that's not because it's not a good scope. It's actually a pretty nice scope. I'm not crazy about the reticle, but I just don't see the value in spending time on it when I am 98% certain it's the same scope.
right. Yep, good possibility.
Yeah. It's again when you see again this conversation again comes up often when you see very similar configured scope from the same OEM for roughly the same amount of money. The differences in internal constructions are not going to be very big. It will just really come down to what the company is asking off of the OEM and how stringently they test everything.
Cor- yeah, correct.
Oh, this is going to be your favorite.
uh,
You know what? Before we answer this,
and to be
let's.
clear, no, we're not laughing because it's a fantastic question. We're laughing
It's a
because
very good
Ilya
question.
and I have had this conversation for years and years and years and
Yeah,
years.
yeah. It's the scope mounting thing is I think responsible. If you like in the right light, if you look at my face, you will see this permanent imprint of my palm. A lot of it is due to the scope mounting stuff.
Yeah. Well, try being tech support at an optics company.
Oh, Jesus, I'd kill somebody.
Those poor guys. It's
Yeah.
it's the majority of the calls. It's the
Yeah.
majority. It's the majority of issues. Quite frankly, if I'm just going to be frank, or
Yeah.
I put issues in quotes.
So when somebody calls you and tells you my scope is not holding zero, in your estimation, what is the probability something's wrong with the scope versus something is screwy with the mounts?
Well, scope or gun or something, but
Correct,
yeah.
correct.
Um,
Okay, let's break it
one
down for
in
let's split it up.
10,000.
Yeah. So here, so total is 100%. I'm going to ask you to divvy this up between these. Something's wrong with the scope. Something is wrong with the mounts. 3, the mounts we use them properly, right? I've seen bad mounts, right? There are bad
Hmm.
mounts and there is bad mounting. That's not the same. Something is wrong with the gun. That's 4. And the guy can't shoot. That's 5. These are 5 options. Split it up.
Um, they're pretty equal between all those except for the scope, I would say, because like guy can't shoot encompasses a lot of things. Like once you start talking to them, you find out that they were shooting 5 different kinds of ammo, and it has a different point of impact. Um, and like we're experienced shooters, we know that, right? But not everybody does.
That's
I mean, I can tell you before I was in optics, or even really, started critically thinking about guns, and this, decades ago, it's like I try to think back. It's like, yeah, I had no reason to think that guns weren't perfectly straight, and it's like something to think about because you know for some reason, and I used to be this way too. And I think we probably all start out this way, and it's the gun is just it's just out of the realm of possibilities that there's anything wrong with it. This thing's straight. It shoots bullets straight. Um, I don't even need to look at it. And in reality, mounts can be loose. Barrels aren't always straight to the receiver. Um, you know, uh, Barrel touching the stock. Action screws loose. There's so many different little nuances. Um, or mounts not tight, or you have there's some there's a couple of mounts out there that rely on spring pressure to grab onto the rail. Well, if that thing takes a bump, what are the chances it settles back in the same exact spot? I mean, it probably does 9 out of 10 times, but there's a really good chance that it moves around a little bit, you know. So there's just a number of things there. What
So
were
the
the other?
question, yeah. So before we move on, I actually do want this question reasonably answered. I just
Yeah.
wanted to lay some background for it. So what are the most common mistakes you see people do when mounting scopes?
Um, well, most common is over torquing around the scope tube for sure, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
that just is what it is.
I've had so many people proudly tell me, I got it tight. I go,
Yeah,
shit.
and and just to be clear here, like this isn't, I have many friends in this industry, in the optics industry also, and like these are not exclusive to Vortex by any means, right? This is just where my experience comes from, and I have talked to all the Jerry at Schmidt and Bender, the guys at Night Force, um, you name it. I have friends at these companies, and we talk about this stuff and compare notes, and did it for many years, right? And
Yeah,
it's there it's consistent across the board when you talk. They see the same things. Every company sees the same exact things, at best I can tell.
that's probably true. So over torquing is number one. One that I see extremely commonly is, with split rings, with most of them. There are some outliers, but with most of them, you want very consistent gap between the screw halves on left and right. I see that not followed 9 out of 10 times. People just tighten them up willy-nilly. People don't torque them consistently. I've seen mounts where 2 screws are relatively tight and the other 2 are just about going to fall off. On the mounts, the same business. People don't torque them. For the most part, if you own a torque wrench and pay a little bit of attention, it's not rocket science.
Yeah, I mean, torque wrench is the best way to go. It really is.
But you have to have even pressure on the screws.
100%.
One, the real common one is for mounts that have a long clamping rail. And there are multiple screws in there. You can't just tighten them really tight on one end and continue. You're going to have shifts.
100%.
In a
Yeah.
particular order. Right?
Yeah. We can expand on that a little bit. And I can just share a real world example of a customer calling in. So mount, one piece mount with, like you were saying, with a one piece clamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, 3.5,
I'm gonna
4 inch.
grab one to show an example. I have one here.
Sure.
Funny thing, that's actually just about the only single piece clamp mount that does not have that problem. It's a different clamp design, but we'll show it anyway. See, there's a single clamp. There are 4 screws. This is an old odd mount, and the way he did his clamp, I actually didn't care. But that's the only
Gotcha.
one I've ever seen that did not care about the sequence. Normally, you want to go 2, 3, 1, and go in circle, making it a little bit tighter every time.
Correct. Yeah, you want to. Honestly, you're better off going like 5 inch pounds at a time.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is you end up getting biased on one end, and then over time, and this is where the wet mounting. I saw somebody ask the wet mounting question already. I think, in my opinion, this is where the wet mounting thing comes into play, because with that long one piece clamp, if you, let's say you just, say the torque setting's 50 inch pounds on the mount, and you tighten one of the very end screws first. Well, now the rest of the screws are not going to be able to overcome the leverage that first screw caused. So now every time but it'll feel tight to you as you tighten it. But then when you go out and shoot, it'll slowly vibrate that clamp into place and cause a huge windage shift as you're shooting. And to give you an example, we actually had a guy with a Voodoo 22 that called in, and he had his 636 razor.
Oh, I know. I was at Vortex when he called. I remember this.
And if I remember correctly, his windage shifted during the match like 10 mils.
Yeah.
And of course the light bulbs go up, or it's, if you can still see through the scope, like, it didn't shift 10 mils. That's just the fact of the matter, right? Like, for something to shift 10 mils, like, it's going to sound like a maraca. Something's going to be loose. It's just going to be not good. But anyways, we worked through it with the gentleman, and he fully admitted, he's like, yeah, I tightened that screw to full torque and just went through it. And then, of course, we got him taken care of, and he never had that issue again. And he was super thankful. He's like, yeah, that makes sense.
Good. That's awesome. So, something on wet mounting. I've talked about it before. I keep on repeating it. If you think about how a mount works, you have a recoil lug that prevents it from moving along the recoil axis, right? And you have a clamp that clamps the rail from the sides and kind of pulls the scope down on it. You have quite a few surfaces touching each other. What you don't want in a mount, you do not want it held in place by friction. You want it held in place by the mechanical interference of recoil lugs, clamp claws, etc. So reducing a little bit of friction on a clamp around your pick rail is generally a good idea. So I use a little bit of grease on a claw. I don't drown it in grease, but I did find that wet mounting is a little bit more consistent. It's not required. Again, if you pay attention, go in sequence and go slow, but fewer problems. All right, I'm gonna let Scott finish with his phone. Oh, yeah. Mr. Northman, the reticle fell in my PST Gen 1. Yeah, that happens.
What does that mean? I was going to ask. My
So
reticle fell.
I'm assuming it shifted, bumped. It didn't physically fall out of the scope. The tube walls are in the way.
Right,
It probably went.
I remember that this question popped up when we were talking about candid reticles. So
Yeah,
I was curious if Northman wouldn't mind clarifying what he
yeah.
means by reticle fell.
So what I've seen, usually you see it rotate and get blurry. It means it shifts longitude a little bit.
Uh,
So we'll see. Let me. All right,
we'll
we'll
wait
let him
till
answer. Yeah, we'll let him
yeah,
answer,
yeah.
and we'll see. Mr. Jeff B is here. Evening, folks. Good evening, sir. Your Fast Fire 4 went out yesterday, so you should have it in a couple of days. He won the raffle for Fast Fire 4 last week. Oh,
It's gonna take a lot of people on testing skills by dropping them and checking zero afterwards. So,
I promised that we would cover this. So.
yeah, no worries. It's it's not a good way to test. There's too many variables, right? The only way to really test the scope this way is to have it in at the very least in no rings, or if you can in no rings and with a collimator, right? On a gun, there's if you're dropping the whole gun, there's barrel shift, mount shift, all sorts of things that can shift from dropping it, right? So it's just not a very good scientific test. I can tell you, I've had many scopes over the years, and from people that I've talked to that have done this, and I've even gone to see them in person to show them the different ways to do it. To get them to kind of try to show me what they're doing, and prove to me that it's shifting, and then I'm able to point out that it's not that. So
It's
um,
almost always the mount. It's almost always this
yeah,
business with the weights clamped around the rail. For example, wet mounting actually helps with this a little bit.
yeah. Well,
But
also with
that's
a
usually what it shifts.
yeah. Also, so we'll cover bolt actions and AR-15s, right? So with ARs, you usually have a gun where the handguard is attached to the barrel nut. The barrel nut is tied to the barrel, right? So if you drop the gun, whether you hit the barrel or the handguard, it puts tensions, it changes the tension on that barrel nut, which is just changing something on the gun, period, right? Now, it
Mhm.
may affect where it impacts, it may not. It's not going to, obviously it's going to be different every time you drop it. But that's the problem there. On bolt guns, if you have a gun that's not bedded very well, um, or um, or not bedded at all, especially like a factory gun that just has no bedding block, no bedding
Mhm.
whatsoever, right? Dropping it, well, it's just going to move in the stock, and that's going to change, harmonics or whatever you want to call it, right? And it's just going to shift impact a little bit. There's no getting around it. So you just can't do a scientific test that way, you know.
Um, so just to add a little bit, you said too many variables. I'm gonna correct that a little bit. Too many uncontrolled variables.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
think this uncontrolled part is very important. So there are two things that are really critical here. It's too many uncontrolled variables, and through vast experience with lots of companies and lots of scopes, the scope is not the first thing to fail under stress like this. That's
correct.
two. Second problem, because catastrophic failures are very easy to see and diagnose. When you have slight shifts, it's incredibly hard to figure out what it is. That's why you don't want to have so many variables. That's true. And another one, and a very important thing, is that when we talked a little bit about common failures, so in manufacturing, occasionally rifle scopes do have a faulty component, yada, 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 or was not quite built correctly, or one of the elements was not glued properly, etc. Unless you're doing this on some sort of a reasonable number, a reasonably large sample size, it's very difficult to draw any sort of a conclusion.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a rifle and before you go hunting, you want to get some idea what's going to happen if you drop it, you can structure your own test, find a way to not damage anything permanently, but shock the rifle a little bit, and it's going to be relevant to your gun, your scope, your rings, to the whole system, right? And if you see shifts, maybe you need to revisit how you mount it or how it's bedded or the
Right.
scope, although that's the least likely of them all. Just the way
Yeah.
they're built, there shouldn't be anything happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not relevant to anybody else with the same scope or the same gun or the same mounts. It is only relevant to your specific setup.
Right. The a better test, while still not perfect, but a better test you can do over a drop test, if you really want to dive into this, is literally just grab a rubber mallet and hammer the shit out of the objective. Just one shot at a time, because you don't you you know because generally when something drops, it hits once. Sometimes it'll bounce around a little bit, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
but just one at a time, so you keep it as objective of a test as possible. But you can hit them. You can hit a scope pretty hard, especially the high-end scopes. You can.
Yeah. Oh, they're very durable. So, for
Yeah.
example, it's easier to do if you have a collimator, and I'm actually about to rotate the camera. And for those of you who are new here, to show you my collimator setup, it's the same basic collimator as most rifle scope companies use. My setup is a little bit different in terms of how I hold the scope, so it's not conducive to durability tests. But what most people have, let me rotate the camera, and I'm going to show you. I assume Scott doesn't have one at home, but I do. And I may have one.
I wouldn't assume that.
Okay, well, I have one or two at work. So let's see. I normally have another camera pointing at this, and I figured out I think I forgot it in my office in Texas. All right, that's my collimator setup. So what most manufacturers do, what a collimator does, it basically projects a reticle at your rifle scope that looks like it's coming from about 100 yards or so. And the scope, and you should be able to see this, the scope sits in these V blocks. I removed mine because I'm doing something a little bit different here. But normally what you do, you put a scope on the V blocks, line it up to the collimator, take it off, hammer it on something, or beat it up with a mallet, put it back into these V blocks in exactly the same place and see if it's still pointing in the right direction. If you do that, that basically deconvolves the mounts, the rifle, all this sort of stuff. It assumes that you're able to put the scope into back into these V blocks in the way that is consistent. Okay, is that right, Scott?
That is correct.
Excellent. So what I have here right now, every live stream lately, I do at least one tracking test, and that will show you what it looks like for the scope through the collimator. So here's a view through the rifle scope that I was messing with. So the thick reticle with large numbers, 12, 16, 20, 8, 4, etc., is the reticle from the collimator, and the tree reticles opposite in the scope. This is Delta Striker 3 to 24, 3.5 to 21 by 44. I set up my scope on these manual motion stages so that I can line the reticle up, right? And you can see, for example, what is supposed to be 12 milliradian through the scope is just about 12 milliradian. For the collimator, that's reasonable agreement. Let's see, I'm going to move it to the right. I'll just dial 10 milliradian, one revolution of the turret. There's a little bit of a movement in the system, but it settles back. So you see a little bit movement as I dial. This is exactly one rotation. Was supposed to dial 10 milliradian and dialed 10, 105, I don't know. So we're probably looking less than 1% error, right? And we'll go back. and go and see if it comes back to 0, and it comes back to exactly where it was. Okay, looks about right.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is what collimator testing looks like. Doing things on a collimator allows us to really get rid of most other variables. Now these
100%.
collimators, they are all the cheap ones are made in China. All the different optics companies have one on just about every desk. So there's a ton of them out there. They're not all amazing, but they are consistent. I don't use it for image quality tests. If you really want to have a collimator for image quality tests, give me a call. I'll build you one. It's a different kind of money, right? That's kind of
100%.
what I do for a living, right? So for my day job, this collimator, I don't know how much it costs, $800 maybe, right? If you want a proper riflescope test systems, yeah, you'll be adding a couple of zeros to that, and not in a nice place.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's what this thing looks like, right? So this is if you really are trying to figure out what your scope does, if your scope is shifting, if your scope is really tracking, this is the way that gets rid of most other confounding variables.
Right. Yeah, and the
So
way. Oh, go ahead, Ilya.
yeah, no, go for it.
I was just going to say the way that the optics companies use these is one for diagnosing issues, two for QC, um, and there are definitely a couple of these in research and development, but mainly just to get scopes set up for tests. So like if we're doing center subjective center resolution, you want to be able to center the reticle. It's a quick way to do it,
Mhm.
but in QC and in troubleshooting or tech support, they're used for checking. You can truly check reticle cant. You can check impact shift. You can check tracking. You can let's see, what am I missing here? I mean, those are the kind of the big three. The you know QC, a good QC person also will catch something that's just looks a bad optical system. So if a scope has a bad objective lens on it, a good QC person will check that before it even gets to a camera system.
Well, bad
Um,
objective lens means you're gonna see some crazy shit off center, so it's pretty obvious.
right? Yeah, if the collimator reticle is just blurrier than what they're used to
Mhm.
seeing,
Yeah.
that type of stuff.
Mhm.
So, but they're super handy tools. It would be, I personally think it would be awesome if they were more readily available for end users, and I think that that'll probably happen at some point. I mean, you're a perfect example. You're right. Like you wanted one for years, and you figured out how to get one, right? Um,
Well, I guilted an optics company into giving me one, so they were
but
trying to get into my good graces, and somewhere they decided that that's the way to do it. Didn't help them in terms of good graces, but I really appreciate it.
right.
Let's see.
Um, but yeah, so center reticles, check reticle cant, and the way you can truly check reticle cant, in case anybody's wondering, is you simply line up the reticles and then dial the elevation and see how much the reticle wanders off of how much the riflescope reticle
Yeah,
wanders off of the
correct.
collimator reticle.
Yes. So what I just did with this Delta Striker, right? So the spacing between the vertical lines and reticles would be changing if it was capped. If
Correct.
But in this case, and I've tested this scope before. Usually I do this blind, but I've had this scope for a long time. It tracks just fine to 20 mils, etc.
Yeah, and
But that's go ahead.
I was gonna say, since you brought up tracking, and you know me, I kind of go 100 different directions at all times. Sorry about this, but since we're talking about tracking, I think one of the big misconceptions that I still see discussed pretty often is doing turret tracking testing on every scope you buy. And while I think that's good for peace of mind, but like tracking really can't change um, from scope to scope. Once that's in the design, it is what it is. It's turrets are literally it's a screw jack. So you can't hardly accidentally make the wrong thread pitch, because you'd have to have both the female and the male thread pitch, get that wrong, and get it wrong exactly the same amount as you're building these turrets, on the CNC, in order for
Well,
them to screw together.
I've seen it, but I've seen it on different batches. I don't think I've ever seen scopes from within the same batch be substantially different.
Well, there could be where the company made a running change to correct, an error early on in production or something like that, right? But it's
That,
typically going to be consistent.
yeah, I'll accept that.
Yeah.
Sorry, the camera was tilted and that was triggering my OCD. So it had to be corrected.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've covered the drop test reasonably well. If something's unclear, please put it in the chat box. Let's see. All right, I think this meant to say opinions on Osite. Are you familiar with Osite?
I don't think I am. Am I?
Yeah, it's a Chinese red dot. I think it's the same company as Olight. They have these red dots that are sealed. They're like magnetically charged. Otherwise, they're just normal red dot sites. I've seen one. It seemed okay, but I've never tested one.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can't have an opinion because I have not seen them.
There we go. Okay, that's somebody's trying to be a smartass.
Right, test engineers would be rolling their eyes right now. Sorry, I'm not to offend anybody.
That's okay. I'm fine offending people. No issues.
I'll be honest with you. I'm gonna have to look up to see exactly what 174 is. Because most typically what you see with scopes is M110. What used to be 810G is now 810H.
So how about we do this? Rather than you try to figure out the MIL G174, Mr. Small Fry 83, how about you tell us what exact what type of specification you're looking for? Because I'll be honest with you, I do
Yeah.
not have the MIL
Now,
stuff memorized. It's very common for people to think that something that says MIL standard is going to be more durable, etc. That's not always, sometimes it's, but it's not always the case. But from my professional experience, I will say this: sending, I used to do a lot of cameras and focal plane arrays for various military and other applications. The set of requirements to send a camera to space is far less stringent than to put a camera onto a car that's on the road, and it's not close. It's much
right.
easier to make something space worthy than worthy to put
Yeah.
on a consumer vehicle.
Yeah.
So, or to put a camera on a tank, or to put a camera on some sort of a military system, it's much easier. The requirements are much simpler than the commercials.
All right. So so 174 is based around the glass material. It looks like.
What?
Which is interesting because my main gig is working with the military, and I've never heard 174 mentioned.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, rather than us spending time digging this up, how about you clarify what exactly you're looking for?
But anyhow, one thing I can say on this is, what like with 810, I think what a lot what gets lost in the wash a little bit is those are standards, right? They're a way to do the test. The program office actually sets the specs for the test, right? So the standard may say you need to use this optical test bench to get these measurements, and then but what those measurements need to be are set per the requirement, right? So multiple scopes out there have been tested to the standard, but depending on which requirement they were going after over the
Oh,
years.
there we go. There's a clarification. So that makes more sense. I was reading the specs for M24SWS, and I saw that spec. I thought you might be able to elaborate on this. So I'm not trying to be a smart ass. Sorry, we misunderstood you because I get this new standard thing thrown at me fairly frequently. I was like, it means nothing. I don't know. I'm not familiar with 170 with the MIL-C with 174, and and if it has something to do with optical glass, I'm very surprised it was anywhere within the M24 requirement. That's odd.
Yeah, well, this would be a really old requirement,
Yeah,
right?
M24 is old.
M24 is a very old system. So
Maybe they just wanted to make sure nobody puts plastic lenses in a scope that goes on it.
yeah, that's certainly possible.
Because for a little while there was a big thing. Everybody thought that plastic doesn't hold up and all that, which is partially true, partially isn't.
Right. Yeah, I'll have to read up. I've literally have never heard 174 mentioned. And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad he brought it up because I feel I feel a little stupid, quite honestly. So now I'm definitely gonna look into it and see what the deal is. But I'll look into it, Ilya, and get back
Yeah,
to you
yeah.
one of these days.
See what you started. Now he's
Yeah,
gonna have
yeah.
to do research. Yeah. So all right, let's see. Where was I? I'm gonna go back. Osite MIL-G 174. I'm curious. Oh, that's actually a good question. Generally speaking, are prismatic scopes any more or less durable than, say, a low power variable?
Um,
And while you think
general.
about it, I'm gonna correct that camera. It's still slightly tilted, and I'm just going
Oh,
nuts here.
good lord.
Like
Um,
you don't know that about me.
I so I don't think LVPOs are any less durable. I could make an argument that it's possible for prismatics to be. You could argue this both ways. You could say, okay, well, prismatic, you got a heavy prism that is, um, that a bias spring still and turrets still have to support. So it could be more susceptible to, shifting, locking up, not adjusting when you make adjustments. This type of thing could be. I'm not saying it is, right? I'm saying could be. Uh, Whereas just by the sheer fact that LPVOS have more parts, you could make an argument. Well, they have more parts, they have more failure points. That would be a legitimate argument. In practice, I would have zero issue using either these days. I think they're all really well made, scopes, especially when you get into the higher end stuff.
So when you say into the higher end stuff, so what price range of specific products?
I
What is
guess in
higher
my
end for you?
mind, in my mind, I'm thinking like ACOG or LCAN versus Night Force, Vortex razors, that type of stuff.
Okay. So once you get into the 2000-ish or thereabouts, I mean, everything is doing
Yeah,
pretty well.
yeah. Even you could even say 1500.
So the
1,000.
new LPVOs, like the new primary arms stuff, Delta 1 to 10, all the different good quality Japanese LPVOs, they're
Yeah,
well built. I
100%.
I very seldom see any kind of problem again, unless the user was doing something totally crazy to it.
Right. Well, I mean, the biggest problem you see with LPVOs is diopter adjustment.
Correct.
errors, end user errors with diopter adjustment.
Yeah. So again, I've done a couple of videos on that. Let's not rehash diopter adjustment
Yep.
here, or we're going to be talking about it in 2 hours. Still. So to what Scott said, it's very difficult to find a prismatic with internal adjustments that truly tracks. They all have hysteresis in how you make adjustments. Once you've got this thing zeroed, they usually stay zeroed.
100%.
Yeah, because you're moving a lot of mass, there's a lot of friction, like they're not built for constant adjustments. LCANs with external adjustments surprisingly do okay. But
Yeah.
basically they're designed to be zeroed and just kept there. With low power variables, people use reticles, some people dial, and there are different ones set up in different ways.
Right.
You will generally see more complaints about low power variables because people do more with them. They always are adjusting something, etc. There's just going to be more complaints. It doesn't mean they're necessarily less durable. Again, it's like the argument between fixed power versus variable power scopes. Yes, in theory, variable power scopes have more stuff moving. In practice, I don't think
Yep.
there's real
Not these
reliability
days.
difference.
Yeah, not these days.
So earlier we mentioned torque wrenches and Mr. Moondog, who is so Moondog is a YouTuber. We talked in the back quite frequently. Says torque wrench is minimum tool requirement. That is correct.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Jeff goes, do you all prefer digital or mechanical torque drivers? I use mechanical. I use fixed sticks, and they work well.
Yeah, I think the key is just that you have something and it's consistent, right? That way you don't run into what Ilya was talking about earlier with ring caps that have one screw that's torqued at 35 and one at 15, or vice versa, or whatever. That's kind of an exaggeration, but as long as you're using a torque wrench, it should be relatively
that's
consistent.
interesting. So Northman tells me that the fixed stick is emergency only. This thing doesn't repeat itself. Really?
Which one? The breakover one, the original breakover one. I think if you don't use it exactly the same, I could see that argument. But the clickover types that they have now, I don't know. I mean, I've never tested one on like at Vortex, since we when I was there, we had, and they still have, obviously, a calibrating device, because they sell torque wrenches, and by the way, they will absolutely calibrate them for you every year, with at no charge. I be interesting. Maybe I'll have to, next time I'm over that way, I'll have to bring some fixed sticks over there and see how they do on the calibration.
I'm very curious. So I use fixed sticks, but I use the less accurate, the ones are called all-in-one, where there's a scale and spring pressure. But I've messed with them a little bit, and I've compared them to the click over ones, etc., and they're consistent enough for my purposes. So, but if you get a chance to make some measurements, I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, they come in a ton of freaking with military gun programs these days too. So
military gun, and I remember, now that I think about it, I've when I visited Q last time, where they assemble stuff, all they use is different fixed sticks, and they are very detail oriented over there. So, I don't know. That's interesting. So two-piece rail. I found many, if not mounting correct, will have your optic twisted versus a one-piece rail.
yeah, I can see that 100%. Yeah, especially with the more affordable two-piece ones, for sure.
Well, I think there the problem is not so much with the two-piece mounts itself, but with the receiver not drilled properly.
Well, I think you can, depending on the receiver type too, you can tighten them down in a fashion where they won't necessarily tighten straight. You have to be cognizant of it. Yeah, and the problem is you can't, they would self-align once you put a scope on there, but then how do you retighten them? You can kind of go through the motions of putting a scope on, taking it off, and vice versa.
So I've bedded two-piece bases that way, right? I would make them relatively, put them into the scope, and then use JB Weld to bed the bottom of the bases. It's not quite straightforward because you have to align the screws. It's hard to do once the rings are on there. You have to,
Oh yeah.
jerry rig all sorts of shit to light it up, but it's more trouble than it's worth, but it's possible. The only thing I can say is that if you have a conventional bolt gun with a two-piece base, buy one of those Burris signature rings with those plastic inserts that self-align, and it will help you with most of the misalignment problems between the two bases.
Yeah. Those burst rings are a lifesaver a lot of times.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time shooting various old mill surplus guns that were, drilled and tapped by a drunk Ukrainian at 3 a.m. at the end of World War II, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've used a lot of. I really like Burris signature rings of all sorts. They have the XTR signature, Z signature, whatever. Whatever has those self-aligning plastic inserts is going to be saving your bacon if you have an
Yeah.
irregularly set up receiver and bases.
Yeah. Well, the other, once barrel nuts became popular on bolt guns, now the barrel has no shoulder, right? So typically those barrels aren't super straight to the receiver. I mean, a lot of times they're not bad, but you can get some that were made on Friday afternoon that are honestly will take, 50 to 100 MOA of windage to get zeroed.
I've seen those once twice.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I wanted to chamber a rifle, right? So I didn't quite have the tools. I used hand tools. So I bought a short chambered Mauser barrel from E.R. Shaw. I bought a Finnish reamer, right? And got a Hugo Mauser receiver. Mitchell's used to sell them, and I put together 308 Mauser for shits and giggles. Took quite a lot of work trying to get that stupid thing to feed, different case tape and all. But I got it working. I still have it. And then at some point, I decided that I'm going to go and have the muzzle threaded so that I was going to leave California, and I imagined putting a suppressor on that thing, right? So I go to a gunsmith in LA. I knew a guy who was a good long range shooter and a very careful gunsmith. So bring the barreled action in, he tightens everything up and carefully spins it, and we realize that that barrel is shaped like a banana. So which explained why I had fairly dramatic point of impact shifts when that thing warmed up, right? So
Yeah. Oh, I bet.
it happens.
Yes.
It happens.
Not properly stress relieved.
Okay.
Most likely, anyways.
Yeah,
So to just to top you real quick, I have a buddy who's
mm-hmm.
building a 6-arc AK-47 right now. I wish I were kidding, but he's doing it.
What's he gonna do with the magazines? That's not gonna feed from an AK mag.
We'll see.
All right, when he's done, I want picture.
Yeah. Oh, so do I. All right. Can we touch on multiple recoil lug and versus one recoil lug? I'll tell you what. Why don't you go first on this one, Ilya? I'm curious on your opinion.
Absolutely. So, multiple recoil lugs look pretty, and there's not enough weight to hurt anything, but only one of them is making contact.
Yeah. So, I'm of the opinion that I don't even know that they're necessary. If you look at some of the, European stuff, there's no recoil lugs, right? Seikos, some Tikos.
Well, Seikos had a tapered rail.
Right. Yeah, but not all. There's some that just have a straight dovetail, right?
Most of the Tikas, when they have an integrated dovetail, but the ring does have a little recoil lug that fits in the recess.
Right.
So
but here's the thing. But my as you know, we've done a lot of Mark 17 testing, right? And that gun is horribly violent. And
okay, so what's Mark 17 for the general audience?
FN Scar 17.
Right,
it's just the full auto variant for military. And you basically have a gun that's 2 pounds lighter than a large frame AR with a bolt that is 3 or 4 times heavier than a large frame AR-10 bolt, right? So it creates an optic destroying device. The legacy for the Mark 17 is that it single-handedly made much more durable lasers, thermal devices, and day optics. Because when SOCOM adopted that gun back in the day, it was literally tearing up every laser and every thermal that they tried testing on it. But it was a program of record gun, so it became the requirement. You had to make your products work on this gun if you wanted to play in the military space.
So what kind of failure modes were you seeing on the Riflescopes on the Mark 17?
Basically, the failure mode that you see, and this is thousands and thousands of rounds, and this is like full auto, tens of thousands of rounds, matter of fact. But essentially, as soon as you get if just one micron of movement in a lens, and then it starts shifting, which causes it to start basically sanding itself to death against the edge of the scope tube. So eventually the scopes turn into a snow globe, and it's every scope out there after a while. Now, like I said, this is tens of thousands of rounds. I've never seen it happen in practice. I've only seen it happen in testing.
Okay. So Northman came back. Remember, that's a gentleman who had a reticle fallout of a Gen 1 PST.
Yeah.
Says it was completely free and was floating around. So it just got loose, sounds like.
Yeah, well, if that was the case, it could have possibly been yeah, we need more details to dive into that. I mean, I guess a second focal plane reticle could have come loose, technically, depending on if it was wire.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's an interesting question. From Link. So Link also works for an optics company.
Okay.
Speaking of machining turrets, if one is trying to minimize the cost by minimizing the tool change cost, that would compromise the consistency, right? So basically letting tools wear a little more.
Oh, yes. However, in my opinion, you have a little leeway there because the turrets are always biased from the erector spring, so you're always riding on the forefront of the thread, right? So you can actually have they don't it doesn't need to be hand fit there, right? Now we try to do that because it just looks better and makes us feel better, but in reality, it's under spring bias.
Yeah. So if that's not clear, let me know and I'll sketch it out. So Mr. Moondog is clarifying on Osite. So Osite and Olight have some sort of marketing packaging agreement, but these are separate companies. So again, I saw the Machacha, looked perfectly reasonable, but to me it looked like a solution looking for a problem. But hey, it's always nice to see something different. Oh, good. So that's a gentleman who was asking about the drop test. So thanks for the response, guys. I like the idea of running my own test prior to a hunt to see what kind of shift my rifle has. Is there any way to diagnose shifting zero besides a column measure? So just to clarify what I said, I just, maybe it wasn't clear enough. There is an extremely low probability it's the scope. So scopes have catastrophic failures. They do not have usually this slight zero shifts. It's extremely uncommon. If you bag up your gun a little bit and something shifted, look at the mounts, look at the bedding, look at the rest of it first. if you did manage to find some sort of a small shift with a riflescope somehow, I'm not sure how it's possible, it's not something you'll be able to diagnose very easily at home. But by checking everything else, you may zero into a riflescope, then you need to talk to a manufacturer. But it's not very likely at all. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like,
Yeah,
I just don't see this. I see them catastrophic, like a reticle falls out. Like I see catastrophic failures. This slow wear where the scopes just does small shifts. I've heard about it so many times. I've never been able to verify.
right. Yeah. Well, and that's the, and if you think about how the scope works, like to add on to like what you're saying, you'll hear about, the I had the scope shift 5 inches and then it's never shifted again. And it's like, well, that's if there's something loose in a scope that's allowing it to shift, it's not going to shift once and just stop, right? And I get that. That's easy for me to say because I understand the internals of the scope, and I don't expect you to just take my word for it. Um,
Guys, you can
but it
take his
is.
word for it.
But yeah, it is. It just is what it is. There, it's
Yeah.
once
So
if a scope's shifting, it's going to shift regularly. And here's the thing, a scope that shifts from, say, getting kicked over, that isn't necessarily going to shift during recoil. Side impact on the scope is will significantly, if a shift can happen, a side impact will cause it much faster than shooting will.
that's fair. So how do manufacturers test for side impact?
Well, during quite honestly, it's so during development,
Correct.
it's
In production, no sane person does it. People claim to do it, they lie.
right.
In
So
development.
in development, the way we have the way Vortex did it is mil spec drop testing. So which
Which is
is which is concrete block. So the drop surface is concrete block, some sort of foam, which the mill standard is not very specific on. So you kind of just got to pick your durometer and go with it, with wood on top, with a piece of plywood on top of that. And then you can pick your standard, right? So the high end stuff might be 4 feet, whereas lower end stuff may only be a foot or 2 or 3, somewhere in between, or whatever, right? But those specs are set at the beginning of a project. And
so.
I guess go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, finish it. Finish what you're gonna say.
I was gonna say, and so then with QC, it's very subjective. Literally, the and is literally grabbing the scope by the eyepiece and hitting it on a hard surface with a rubber cover so it doesn't damage the scope. So the majority of you guys that buy these scopes, like, and are I see a lot of people babying them around, and it's like I don't have the heart to tell them what that scope's probably seen. And this goes for most of the high end scopes out there, right? This isn't just Vortex. I'm talking universally. That their scope has probably been used as a kind of like a hammer before when it was going through QC.
Well, to be fair, the only ones who were creative enough to use that for marketing is Night Force, but everybody does it. So two things. I've known Scott for about close to 15 years or thereabouts. If he takes a strong position on something, he usually knows what he's talking about. We've had many arguments over the years. You have no idea how many months of arguments we've had over the years. If he really takes a strong position on something, probably correct. One. Two, once I was visiting Vortex for professional reasons, and I ran into Scott, who is dropping a bunch of F-bombs. Somebody sent in a scope, again, claiming it doesn't hold zero. He sees me, get over here, grabs a scope, I think it was a PSD Gen 2, if I remember correctly, by the eyepiece. The floor where we were was carpeted, bangs it on the floor like with a baseball bat, puts it in the collimator, goes C, bangs it on the floor again, fairly hard, puts it in the collimator, goes C. I think I caught you in a particularly frustrated moment that day. They are pretty durable. Look, so it is, in theory, it is possible to bend the objective bell slightly so it doesn't spring back. In theory. In practice, I just don't see it.
Right.
While you're shooting, like when you line up, you don't want to exert pressure on objective bell. You can't shift your zero. But if you
Yeah.
remove your hand, it will spring back, right? So like if you're going to
100%.
be, you don't want to be pushing on any of this stuff while you're shooting. Like same reason, I remember some years ago, a friend, when I lived in LA, a guy I knew pretty well, was a good friend. He asked me to set up a scope for him with his rifle. I set it up, set it and everything in. He comes to the range, puts it in a bag, extends his hand forward, puts his thumb on the barrel, presses the barrel down on the bag, and shoots and says, "Oh, it's not zeroed." Yeah, you're pressing the freaking barrel. The same thing can happen if you're pressing on the scope. If you're going to be exerting downward pressure, press on the stock, press on the diving board, on the mount, that's fine. Not on the barrel, and not an objective bell of a rifle scope. But as far as actual durability to impact, they're pretty freaking durable. And again, if something breaks, it's broken. You're not going to see these small, minimal shifts that are hard to chase.
Yeah.
Like I've spent years trying to verify one of those. Couldn't.
Yeah. Typically, if you're having those small little shifts, it's either going to be, you're right on the edge of and this is a debatable term these days, but right on the edge of a node with your load, to where you're getting just kind of like double groupings and this type of stuff, or the mount's just shifting around a little bit under recoil. Now you won't be able to feel that amount. You won't be able to feel it moving. Like you can't grab it and shake it around, but the recoil is just enough to like move it every once in a while because maybe the clamp's not seated great, or more than more so than even that is the if you have a pick rail that is screwed, like a standard Remington 700, pick rails, they come loose. It is what it is. They're held down with shoulder screws. And the shoulder of those screws is literally the only tension if you don't have it bedded. The only tension holding that rail to the gun, which you know seems like a horrible idea for a heavy recoiling gun, right? Like you absolutely need to bed the rail at very least on a gun like that. If you're running a
Yeah,
Magnum or something, especially with a
I
heavier scope.
I shoot the fix. It's a single piece aluminum receiver with a machined rail. So
Yeah. If you can run a one piece action, do it every time.
yeah. So Mundo goes, Ilya needs a collimator for the camera. I don't know what it means.
Because you're getting obsessed with the can't.
Okay.
Would be my guess. I don't know.
That's probably it. Because I was like, you don't know how many collimators for cameras I have. To which Link pointed out that he's not the only one who misspells my name. So Moondog, you did it too. That's another good question from the same gentleman who was asking about the drop tests. And as far as a thread locker, what do you recommend, and should you lower the torque to account for the extra lubricant? So I assume you mean on the screws for the scope caps. Scope halves. Scott?
Yeah.
Scott?
So you can argue this both ways, whether or not thread locker is needed. I'm in the camp that it's not needed. I've been shooting many years, many tens of thousands of rounds competition over the years, and have never used thread locker. Part of that is because when you tighten a scope ring around a scope tube, you have a spring effect from that tube. So the screws are always under tension. So they're almost like a quasi. It's almost like there's a lock washer there because of that. So in my opinion, it's not necessarily needed. Now, if you are going to use thread locker, then yes, I would reduce the torque, and you can look up those tables online. I think Loctite, I believe, has it right on their website for the individual screw sizes, everything. You can track it down to exactly what you need to do there.
So I'll agree with Scott, but I'm gonna go a little bit more extreme. Through hundreds of rifles, God knows how many rounds. And Scott is a precision guy. I do a lot of semi-auto, a lot more semi-auto shooting than Scott does. So in terms of round count, I'm maybe ahead of you. I've never, maybe, I don't know, it's hard to say. I've never had properly torqued rings, okay, good quality rings, go loose on me. Never, ever, not once. So to me, trying to Loctite them is again a solution looking for a problem. If you use a torque wrench, torque it down properly. I've never seen it go loose. If you do decide to use a Loctite, yeah, go look up exactly what you need to do to the torque, but it's not going to be precise because, you know, with physicists we say, oh, yeah, this particular thing, it works for a spherical cow in a vacuum, and out in the real world, you know, not so much.
Yeah.
So whatever tables you look up, they imply a particular surface finish, particularly
Right.
degreased rings, particularly degreased threads with the exact perfect geometry, and you will never have that ever, right? So is it going to get you in trouble? Not necessarily. Is it something I recommend? No, it's just creating problems in your ass. Just clean and degrease the screws and the threads, torque it down properly, and go shoot.
Yeah. Now there are some law enforcement agencies that, you know, it's part of their SOP that they have to do it. You know, and in that case, I would hopefully they have looked up, you know, what the proper torque is.
You realize how funny that is, right?
I'm trying to be nice.
Okay, all right, let's not. I have the most respect possible to our armed forces and law enforcement, but as a guy who works with many of these agencies, maybe not as many as Scott,
Hey,
but
well,
quite a
having
few.
respect for what they do is totally different than having respect for
Yeah,
the
okay.
mechanical abilities, right?
Oh, for fuck's
Like,
sake. Yeah, and it's not for reasons of malintent or stupidity, not at all. Just general purpose, ignorance on the part of the people who create half of these specs.
yeah,
Look, I remember I had this conversation a long time ago with Jeff Gurvich. He's got a YouTube channel. He's a former SF guy, etc. He was at Bragg. When they wanted a new low power variable, they wrote the specs, and they just wanted to get a Vortex Razor Gen 2. That's what they wanted. That's what they were trying. That's what they asked for. They wrote the specs, and the big army went to procurement and got them a front focal plane SIG Tango 6.
yeah.
Requirements work in an
There's
interesting way.
yeah. I will refrain from commenting on that
Yeah,
competition because
yeah,
I obviously have a lot of
yeah. I'm
inter
sure. Yeah,
knowledge about it.
correct. Yeah, I was not involved, so I can talk about it. So Brandt goes 6 arc is an interesting idea.
Six arc
It is
AK.
6 arc AK, yeah. Link, it makes more sense to build a 5.8 by 42 Chinese AK than a 6 arc, in my opinion. Not if you're in the United States. Where are you going to find ammo for the 5.8 by 42 Chinese round? I'd love to shoot one. If I could find ammo, I'd build a gun for it. I'm curious. But where are you going to find ammo? 6 arc, you can find ammo. I don't know how you're going to make it feed in an AK, but you'll have ammo. Mr. Cunt Bucket is here. I was wondering what happened to you. You missed the last part. So you're saying we should grab some rope and assume our scopes are nunchaku rated. So if you are out of ammo and that's what you have to do to protect yourself, it's going to work much better than you think.
Oh yeah.
You can really fuck somebody up with a couple of rifle scopes.
Well, especially like a Gen 2 Razor, if you catch them with the turrets,
Oh, yeah,
and do some
that would be.
damage and take some skin.
Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, I should start. I do all sorts of different martial arts. One of them is Filipino martial arts. I should do it with 2 scopes instead of sticks. It should be interesting. Instead of pressing down the scope objective or diving board, good to use a device like the MDT Baker wings. I'm not sure what Baker wings are. Scott probably knows.
They just mount on the side of the stock, so you can literally just use your.
Yeah, I
There we
don't.
go.
So I don't press on a diving board. I press on the stock, but I have a little thingy on the side of it that I use to press. And remember, because I use the fix, I have a handguard that goes all around, right? So I have a lot to.
Yeah. No, I will say a good chunk of the very top shooters in the country hold on top of the scope, not the objective, but just on top of the scope.
Correct. On top of the scope, you can. Objective, you should.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Northman goes, so AK in 6 arc. Let's make it make sense. 762 by 39, morphed into eventually to 20 Russian, into 6 PPC, into 6.5 Grendel, and then into 6 arc. Correct, they're all related, yes.
Yeah.
So 6 arc is not hugely different from 6 PPC, and both are a little bit harder to make feed in AK, but PPC will work better. Has a little bit more slope to the case. All right, Mr. Zach Perego. That was about durability. That makes sense. Thanks for the clarification, fellas. You are very welcome, and thank you for the good questions. Link. Stage Dynamics broke a Steiner M8XI 1 and 8 and dropped us. Yeah, I've seen that. So he got, there was probably some sort of a manufacturing defect, and so the eyepiece came off. He dropped that thing on the concrete, and the eyepiece fell off.
Yeah. If you drop a scope from those heights, especially on a gun, you're gonna bend the eyepiece. So the weak point in any variable power scope is right at the eyepiece underneath the mag ring, because there's literally a 180-degree cut in the scope tube right there. Now I'm not saying that's where this one broke. It probably came off of just how it was attached, but
yeah, I didn't see it up close, but I think that whenever that particular scope was assembled, something was a little bit off.
Yeah, but you can 100% bend an eyepiece right there, and then if you drop your gun and all of a sudden your magnification is not working, it's because it's the pin that goes through from the magnification ring down into the erector tube is being pinched by that groove that it rides in, which is the 180-degree cut I was talking about. Which I probably, I should have grabbed some show and tell. I'm trying to think if I have something close by. Next time.
If you don't, we'll do it next time.
Yeah.
Mr. Small Fry is dropping out. Thank you for the good questions. I appreciate it. And you made Scott look up a meal standard, so I'm gonna follow up with that, and we'll get back to you with what it really meant. All right, so we got to the end of what we've got in the chat box. We've been at it for about an hour and a half. I limit these things to under 2 hours. So if there are any other specific questions, please put them in the chat box. What I wanted to ask Scott, and so if anything comes into the chat box, right, I'm gonna ignore it for about 5 minutes. So what I want to get out of you is some sort of a top level summary on Riflescope failure modes and failure types, right? So when we talk about Riflescopes, we talk about infant mortality, things that happen quickly. We talk about potential external damage. We need to probably talk a little bit about rings, like why vertically split rings, well, the way they used to be done are a bad idea, what they do to the scope, and can you see some sort of a slow accumulated wear and tear on a rifle scope just through use? We keep on getting these people say, "Oh, I run my gear super hard, all my scopes die." Like, what does it mean? Is it possible? Like, what does that mean? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can tell you, I've never seen a worn out scope. So I don't know. I would have to assume, and the coatings are better these days, and I know this isn't the direction you wanted me to go, but I'm going to bring it up. Um, about the only thing I've seen wear out on optics, like, and optics that have been around long enough to see this on, is coating degradation, right? Now that's yet to be seen on the coatings that have been being used, and it's not necessarily the materials; it's more the process is more refined these days. But that's the only thing that I've seen ever, like, that I would call wearing out on a scope over life, right? The turrets, the erector gimbal, the erector springs. Typically, like erector springs, for instance, you would think would get a set over time, but they're so overpowered to begin with and under stressed that I've really never seen that. Now, have I seen a spring that wasn't properly tempered? Yes, right. But it typically gets, but it's very few and far between. It's usually related to a batch, so you catch it in QC or whatnot. So I've never seen a scope that's past QC where the erector springs wear out. Um, I've never seen turrets wear out. Other than, I guess you could say, if you have a turret that uses set screws and a V groove to zero the turret caps, right? Like, you can obviously
Yeah.
damage those up pretty good from just re-zeroing
Yeah,
constantly.
you keep on denting that relatively soft
Right.
metal. Yeah.
Which is more annoying than an actual issue, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, we're talking about brass threads that are naturally self-lubricating in most instances when it comes to turret screws. So there's very little, if any, wear there over time. Um, and even if there was, you're still relying on the bias spring that's keeping everything up on the forefront of those threads, anyways. Um,
Okay,
so
so let's approach this from a slightly different angle now, because
sure,
I'm trying to drive you to some relatively specific answer. I
yeah,
just don't want to come out and say it. So
okay,
you've got a $400 scope with precision aspirations and a $3,000 one, right? You would expect the $3,000 one generally to have fewer problems than a
absolutely.
$400 one. Why?
Um, well,
When I say
one, let
few
me.
problems, I'm not talking about one scope with many problems. Like 1,000 scopes are in the field, and some number of them are gonna have some problems, usually fairly early on, right? Why will you see more of them with a $400 scope than a $3,000 one?
Well, QC for one. I mean, because typically your $400 scope's not going. Every scope's not going to go through a full QC
hmm
process. Um,
Before QC.
what's that?
Before QC. What I'm looking for is before QC. I'm trying to steer you toward talking about build quality, because build quality makes a difference.
Yes, 100%.
There is
Yes,
in-process QC. As the scope is being built and assembled, there are checks, alignment checks, and other things that are being made. So,
yes. So you're going to have looser tolerances, right? Most likely, things are not going on the lower end scope. You're not going to be bedding lenses the way you're on the higher
mhm,
end scope, which is kind of a twofold thing there, right? Because if you're not bedding the lenses, that means there's less glue in the whole system, and you have looser tolerances on the lock
yep,
rings,
correct.
right? So these are all things that can come loose over time, right? Like, yeah, if you took a $400 scope and went and shot, you know, 20 matches a year with it and practiced, to the point where you're shooting 20, 30,000 rounds, or I guess that's a little much for what I just said, but you get my drift, right? Like, it
Mhm,
way more likely to have something come loose in it than
correct,
a high end scope.
Correct.
for sure.
But when you say columns, it will still be a relatively catastrophic failure. It's not going to be this, for the most part, it's not going to be this slow degradation. Once something is loose, it goes to shit very fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not like you
Absolutely.
have small shifts. And one of the other things that to keep in mind, right? So when people design rifle scopes, oftentimes a $3,000 scope will have a more sophisticated optical system. It will also have a more sophisticated mechanical system. It will be just a better designed piece, and it will be a better assembled piece. And it's going to be checked more thoroughly. That's what you're paying for.
100%.
Okay.
From,
And every time somebody comes up and says, "Oh, my Arkin is," fill in the blanks. You've all heard about Arkin being better than Schmidt and Bender and all that sort of stuff. No, it's not. It's a $400 scope. $400 is how much it costs to just QC the Schmidt and Bender, right? The amount of time many good companies put into these things. If you look at the labor rates and the equipment investment, etc., it's a very significant portion of the cost of the rifle scope.
yeah, 100%.
Okay, let's see. We do have a couple of remaining questions. Mr. Cunt Bucket. Well, that's actually a good question. Does the diopter adjustment design have any significant effect on a durability of the scope, i.e. fast focus versus the old locking setups?
All things being equal, and what I mean by that is just like if it was the same scope built to the same desired specs at the end.
Mhm.
You you definitely have, with a fast focus, you have another moving part with an O-ring. And so this isn't necessarily a durability thing, but if you're talking about like dunk testing
Mhm.
and this type of thing, O-rings are always a concern of, for pinching, and, O-rings themselves are known to, just tolerancing for O-rings is not fantastic. So I guess in that aspect, yes, but for, like actual shooting, if we're not talking about like, dunking a scope for a few hours at whatever, 30 feet or 66 feet or whatever it is, I would say no, not really. However, if you are more likely to, like, say, if you're in the desert, more O-rings isn't necessarily good because you're getting more dust in there that can theoretically cause dust and dry weather and heat. So you could run into a situation where you pinch an O-ring while adjusting diopter. That being said, like there's still, like, you still have an O-ring when you're adjusting the diopter on a non-fast focus also. So, but it's not as exposed to the elements per se.
The only thing I could probably add to that, and that pertains a little bit more toward less expensive scopes. So I've seen a little bit more of a tolerance mismatch on fast focus eyepieces on cheaper scopes. And what it does, it makes them more vulnerable to damage from mild drops. If you drop it at an angle on an eyepiece, with the fast focus ones, I've seen them just go sideways and screwy and all that. On inexpensive scopes, I've seen that to be less durable more susceptible to impact than the classic lock ring designs.
Right.
But again, you have to start with something a little bit out of spec, which again on less expensive scopes is not super uncommon.
Right. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Brandt. From a mechanical aspect, what would you say Vortex is doing better than the other optics in the FFP scopes?
I'll be honest with you. Most of the high-end companies are all doing really well these days. You know, the on the Vortex side, I mean, I'd have to speculate on a few things here, which I'd hate to do. You know, because I will say because of well, maybe not because of, but you know, Vortex is a large company these days, and they have invested a lot of money into test equipment and QC that you really just have to be a large company in order to do. You know, before that, you're really just relying on human testing. Um, so there's, I mean, you could say that, but honestly, all the scopes out there in the, you know, when we're talking tier one scopes, especially, or you know, first focal plane scopes, like they're all pretty damn good these days. I gotta say. I
Not even
you know if anything, the one place I will say that I feel like um, Vortex has done really well with is LPVOS. I think that's where they shine. You know, the 1 to 10 was, you know, out was an early, you know, surprised a lot of people. You know, and with
surprised
how
the hell out of me.
well the 1X is on that scope with a 10 by erector and a wide field of view. Um, you know, it's a pretty special scope. Um,
Doing that performance with a wide field of view is hard, right?
right.
So again, looking from the side, so if you're looking at front focal plane precision scopes, and Brandt is a precision guy we met at the Burris Optics Team Challenge a couple of weeks ago. So from a precision standpoint, you know, if you're shooting on high magnification, I think the Razor Gen 3 has the best eyepiece in the business right now in terms of eye box and how easy it is to get behind. But that's not a mechanical difference. That's an optical difference. Vortex does a little bit more of their own design than many other smaller companies do. But in the end, if you're talking about mechanical quality, durability, repeatability, etc., it would be incredibly hard to find any measurable difference between, let's say, the 7 to 35 attacker and the 6 to 36 Razor Gen 3, and maybe Element Theos. Like, again, because I know Element guys fairly well, I know what they ask the manufacturers to do. I don't have any insight into what Zeiss asks LOW to do, so I can't talk about it. You will not. I don't think you'll find any real quality difference from a mechanical standpoint. They're made by the same OEM to essentially the same standard. And correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but I'm not seeing a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of the difference in how the different companies approach their design process and their QC process. If you were to take, you know, 100 of this brand scope and 100 of this brand scope and 100 of this brand scope, the failure rates would be slightly different, right? Um, but it would still be really close, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think it is any kind of a different. Yeah, if you take 1,000 scopes and do rigorous measurements, maybe you'll find something. But it's going to be very hard to find systemic differences, not from
Yeah,
what I've seen.
right.
So, a couple of good questions. So from Link, he's asking about this new UTG scope. That's that Integrix.
Hmm.
Mechanically, I found the turret a pretty different design. So I had one here for a while, and mine had tracking issues, and it's a problem they knew and they found it, and it's going to be corrected. In all other ways, it looked very decent mechanically.
So
But
was it just adjusting fast or slow, or was it hanging up, or
yeah, no, it was just the pitch on the screws was off.
okay,
Like
yeah,
the MOA was checking fine, whoever translated the MRAD wasn't. the engineers caught it, didn't tell the marketing people. Marketing people sent me a scope with incorrect right.
It
So I
happens.
went, but okay, late stage prototype happens. Optically, it was wonderful, and mechanically, like the feel and everything was good. The turret was good, but I can't pass judgment until I see full production scopes. So
Yeah.
the simple truth is we don't like we
Yeah.
simply don't know. The design looks good to me, but until some of these make it out there and until I see a production scope, I just don't.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any besides at SHOT Show.
Yeah. The chat show, they look, optically they look pretty nice. I will
Yeah,
say that they look like
they look
nice.
like decent scopes.
Yeah. Oh, that should be good. At least I like this question. What is your opinion? In your opinion, is considered to be a tier one optic?
Well, that is definitely a subjective question or a
Hence it
subjective answer.
says. Hence it says, "What is in your opinion?" Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, true. In my opinion, I think the majority of stuff that I think these days, I venture to say 3,000,
Ballpark, yeah.
3,000 and up. You could stretch it down to 25. That being said, there's some pretty excellent performers in that lower range these days too. So it's, but yeah, I would say there. I think the
All right. Let's throw some brands at you, starting from most expensive Tangent.
tier 1.5 or whatever's better than tier one.
Yeah. Okay. ZCO.
Um, uh, Definitely tier one. I wish their field of view was wider.
Okay. We might see that after June of 2026. Let's see.
Now that being
Colors.
said, that the Tangent 525 has a wide field of view.
Yeah, it just depends on who got an angry letter.
Yeah,
The show guys came out of colors. I mean, they want to tread very carefully.
yeah,
Uh,
I could see it.
colors.
Um, I really like what they're doing with their eyepiece designs on these latest scopes.
With a wide angle, yeah.
With the wide angle eyepiece. Um, I mean, I think their top end offerings are tier one.
Okay.
I think if I'm being honest, there's like they do some things very 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 well. Um, like the eyepiece, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's trying to be careful here, right? Um,
Okay, if there's something you are not comfortable answering, given what you do for a living, don't.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm more on the gun side now, so but I still, it's. I think they're really good scopes.
yeah.
For a competition scope, if I had to choose between like a ZCO and a Collis, I would choose ZCO.
Okay. That's fair. So, just colors, remember, so I don't have a good relationship with colors Swarovski, to put it mildly. But the new wide-angle scopes are absolutely tier one. The
Yeah,
previous 5 to 25 was tier one mechanical, optical. I think it was half a step behind the nice stuff.
I would agree with that.
Mechanically, wonderful. Very, very nice scopes. All right, Night Force Attacker.
Tier one,
All right, Razor Gen 3.
tier one.
Okay. Schmidt.
Um, I mean, they've done a lot of stuff. They're definitely tier one. Um, I, I think the 636 that they did definitely stepped up. I think before that 636, the 5 to 25 was still the best scope they had done for years,
Correct.
optically.
Yeah.
But and these are my personal opinions. This is not related to any company. I can since I don't work for an optics company right now, so I can kind of do this a little bit. However, I still want to be respectful. But
As you should be.
but no, I mean, when it comes to Schmidt, like, man, talk about a scope that was ahead of its time. That 5 to
Yeah.
25. I mean, it's still a very well,
Look, think of it this way. So Schmidt 5 to 25, when it came out, defined what a tier 1 scope should be. Everything
yeah,
else that came afterwards is standing on its shoulders.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay, let's see. Oh, Hensoldt, your favorite.
Man, I knew that was coming next.
Yeah.
um, I would. Are they technically in business right now?
Kinda. Like they don't do anything civilian.
Um,
You can buy them
I
at
think
auction
they're
in
tier
US
one, but
privately.
yeah, I guess you can classify. I mean, if we're going to classify, if we classify Zeiss as tier one, um, then we have to classify Hensoldt as tier one.
Okay. All right.
Um,
So let's get now to a couple that are a little bit lower in price, and I'm curious where you will classify them. So I'm not gonna bring up Zeiss S5 because I think it's probably going the way of the dodo since they're gonna stop doing things in Germany. How about Zeiss S3?
I think and that's one of those scopes I was thinking of
Yeah.
when I was talking about kind of getting into that.
Yep.
I think it's it's right there. I mean, I would have no issue using it as a
So
competition
yeah.
scope.
So that's the two to me that I really quite. I don't know, like they're right on that border between tier 1 and tier 2. It's Zeiss S3 and Element Theos. They're very, very nice. Razor Gen 3 does have a slightly better eyepiece. So like it has a little bit of an advantage optically, but they're nice scopes. Also, like with the Steiner T6XI, it's right at that $2,500, $3,000 mark, and it's a nice scope. So I just don't know. So Jeff is asking about Nightforce NX8. NX8 is a nice scope. It's not tier 1, maybe tier 2.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, the high mag NX8s I think are
the
exceptionally
4032,
impressive. Personally,
4032 is very nice. 2.5 to 20 is not great.
yeah,
Well, it got
but
better over time.
yeah, I mean, for its size, optical quality and price, like it's a freak. Those are some impressive scopes in my
Yeah,
opinion.
they're very nice. Oh yeah,
Um,
Pete's bringing up March. Yes, Optics, Steiner.
so
March.
he's just okay. March, definitely tier one, but they do some unique stuff. Like you can't go into March thinking that you're going to get, like, you can just buy one of their scopes and it's going to be the best scope, right? Like, you need to do your research. You need to understand what compromises they're doing. Like you're not going to get an 8-inch scope that's the same mag range as a 20-inch scope and think it's going to perform the same. It's just not going to, right? The cost went into packing everything into that small package,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what March does best, right, in my opinion, right? And they do it very well for what it is, but you have to understand that's what you're buying. I mean, it's very, very, very impressive, which is why I think you like them, right? Because what they do
Oh yeah.
is very impressive. But
So
at the same,
March is absolutely tier 1 scope, and their larger stuff like the 5 to 42 is absolutely tier 1 scope.
yeah,
But a lot of the designs they do, they're trying to make them with very high erector ratio and very short and very light. So that introduces some optical compromises, and the image quality they get out of it, given the complexity, is amazing.
100%.
But they're very hard designs to build. They're very, very challenging. So,
Yeah. And US Optics, I was recently asked about US Optics, and I got to tell you, I don't know what to say about them these days because I haven't seen any of their scopes in years. Back when John still owned the company, I saw some some really nice optical designs coming out of there. But I don't know that I can have an opinion on it right now.
I'm pretty well familiar with them. The catch is that this FDN stuff, their high-end stuff, optically it's same designs they always had. They just cleaned up the mechanics.
Okay.
It's kind of tier one, sorter, right on the border there, because they are very nice, but they're very long. There is tunneling on the low end. I mean, they're kind of right around there, but they need modernization. They were tier one when Schmidt was defining tier one, right?
Right.
But the field has kind of moved forward.
Yeah.
So, and the other stuff
That
is
sounds like a
much
fair
less good.
assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say this, right? So when they moved to North Carolina, they cleaned up the turret, they cleaned up mechanical issues that US Optics had, kept the same relatively simple but high, well-performing optical system, and they're nice scopes.
Yeah.
I still have I like the FX10 power, among other things. Still have one of the new ones,
Yeah.
the FX10. So.
And then Steiner, I'd say the MX7s are tier one.
Yeah, MX7s are definitely tier one. The T6Xi, that's the same like field as Element Theos and Zeiss S3, and they're kind of right there in the border.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with that.
This may be an oddball. What about those Minox Blazer?
That's not an oddball one. The Blazer scopes, especially the 1-7, is one of the most impressive optical designs I've ever seen. The Minox 5-25. It's really, really nice. But I've had mixed. I've had a few, and I've had a couple that look fantastic. Kind of right along that 5-25 design that we know who's designing it, and always looks good. But I don't know if it's on the manufacturing side. I've just seen some variances.
All right. So the design and the scope is tier one. The company behind them, not quite.
That's a good way to put it. Sure.
And they're more or less non-existent in the U.S. market. So for us,
have you seen any of the higher have any of the higher mag Blazer scopes shipped? I'm assuming they have, right?
Oh no, they ship, but they basically don't have anything in the US for practical purposes. There's no marketing, no distribution, nothing. The higher mag Blazers are front focal plane hunting scopes with simple reticles, exceptional optical and mechanical quality, super expensive.
Yeah.
But they're really for people who buy, Blazer set,
Blazer rifles,
grand, and they want this Blazer scope to go on it, and it's wonderful. But it's not, for all practical purposes, they're not really competing in the market. They're just trying to put a scope on their own rifles.
But to answer your question, like the Blazer scopes typically are really, really, really impressive.
Yeah, they're very nice.
On the level of like Tangent optics, just overall really nice.
Yeah. Tangent does a few things in terms of optimization that I don't think anybody else quite does, at least not that I've seen.
Yeah, I would concur with the testing that I've done how many times have I talked to you about tests? Every time I tested that scope, I find something new that's just like amazing with it. Stuff that most end users would never notice, but as an optical nerd, really makes you a little giddy.
Yeah. But anyhow, so we're right at 2 hours. So we are going to have to wrap this up. Locals limits me to 2 hours. I appreciate you guys sticking with us, and I really like those were good questions. There were a couple of monologues that I was planning that I didn't get to do because we had a lot of questions. And ultimately, the reason I like doing this is the Q&A, right? The interaction is where I learn the most about what you will want to know. And Scott, thank you very much for joining me. I finally corralled you into it after many, many attempts.
Yeah. It's well, especially the last 4 months of my life, I've been on the road quite a bit.
I bet, yeah. So as I wrap up, guys, keep this in mind. If you watch this afterwards as a regular video and there is something you want to ask that we didn't cover, the easiest way to get a hold of me is my website, darklordofoptics.com. I respond to those the quickest. Otherwise, put a comment under the video, whichever platform you're looking on, and I will, if I don't know, I'll ask Scott. And if there's enough demand, we'll find a time and we'll do this again. It sounds like there's a fair amount of material that we can still cover.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Scott. And good night.
Absolutely.
Oh, Jeff, did the Burris XTRPS certificate raffle get claimed? Yes, it did get claimed. Next month, I'm gonna raffle off some other stuff. I've got a few things coming. All right. Good night, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you, guys.